So I want you to imagine that you're walking down a street and a stranger comes up to you and he says, hello. Close your eyes and open your mouth. I want to put something in it. You're all laughing. But that was your breakfast. And that was what you had for dinner last night. And that's what happened when you went to the grocery store last week. Because our food system is entirely built upon people making things who we never meet, ingredients that we don't know, that we can't even pronounce, all from unknown origin. It's a system that we created when we completely consolidated our food system, and we're all the poorer for it. We've destroyed local economies, and we've centralized and put our food system at great risk. Part of the problem is we can't even pronounce the names of the food that we buy. I have a 10-year-old daughter. I remember when she was 7, she was standing with me at a grocery store and she picked up a loaf of bread. And she said, what are all these things in this loaf of bread? I can't pronounce any of them. She said, why do you buy something, Daddy, that we don't even know what it is? And I really thought about that. You know, it's a problem that we have. It's mainly a problem of language, which ironically, as Bob was speaking about just now, it's a problem that plagues the climate movement. The image that people conjure in their brains when they think about climate change is a polar bear on an ice floe. But the problem with that image is you don't know what you did to put the polar bear there or how you're going to get the polar bear off. And because we only traffic in what I call crisis pornography, we never actually give people the roadmap for what they can do to actually shift the conversation and actually shift our role in putting so much carbon in the atmosphere. The main drivers for climate change are food, water, and energy. So my wife and I, 5 years ago, decided to see if we could actually help to change that conversation, starting first with food. So I went around the United States and I asked people to explain to me not problems, but solutions. We wanted to put together what the lexicon of a sustainable food system would look like. And we ended up, after 5 years, with that. People all over the country sharing solutions, sharing this new language. Because the thing about sustainability, which you could say is a much maligned term in itself, is interesting, is that the toolbox of solutions for climate change is sustainability. All of those sustainable actions we do collectively will draw carbon out of the atmosphere. And they are all actionable, small steps that individuals can take that can have a tremendous collective impact. So how are we going to share these amazing ideas from amazing people all over the country? Well, one of the choices that we made was to tell their stories in their own words with images. This is Will Allen. He's an urban farmer in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who had a pretty crazy idea, which is, as you can see on the right, he wanted to raise fish indoors. In this case, actually, in boxes in the middle of an urban area. So he raises perch, then he filters the water through, and all that nutrient-rich water from those fish, it grows tomatoes. And then before that water goes back, it's purified through the soil, and he ends up growing worms. An amazing guy, an amazing story, but how was I going to explain what Will was doing with an image? Well, I couldn't do it with one photograph. It actually took many. And over the course of a day with Will, and literally hundreds of photographs, I found a way to explain what Will Allen was doing in Milwaukee. But you know, the problem with photography, they always say, you know, picture's 1,000 words. Picture's 1,000 questions. Because when I look at pictures, I'm always wondering, what's that thing in that guy's hand, you know? Why does she have so many tomatoes? So I thought, what if I could actually get Will to explain in his own words what he was doing to completely reinvigorate his urban community and communities all across the country by giving them access to ways to grow their own protein where they live. So I asked him, unfortunately, can't say it that well, but I asked him to explain in his own words, got everybody's names, found out where it was, and then I asked him to give me the one term that described what he was doing. And Will said it was nothing short of a good food revolution, which actually it became the name of the book that he put out a year later. That journey with Will ended up being an image that has been in, as I'll explain later, over 1,000 shows across the United States in the last 3 years. And Will has built and helped to build about 500 of these aquaponic systems across the United States, giving people an opportunity to have more food security, more control over food in their communities, while also generating revenue in urban areas. But his is not a unique story. The amazing thing that people always ask me, they always say, you know, where is the center of this new food movement? And I always say it's not Brooklyn and it's not Berkeley. It's all of those places in between. And for me, the one story that always stands out is a story down in Alabama. A bunch of architects and urban planners, graphic designers, were at a conference together, and somebody brought up that there was a town called Greensboro that had died. Main Street died. Every single shop on the street boarded up. So they went down there to see what happened. And an old guy was walking down the street and said, "Excuse me, sir, what happened to this town?" And he said, "I don't know. I don't know what happened. But I can tell you that you used to go to that place across the street and you used to stop and get a slice of pie and a cup of coffee. And that's how you did your business. You'd see everybody in the town. And that's how we conducted things here." So what did these urban planners do? They took that storefront, reopened it, opened up a pie shop, started serving coffee. And within 2 years, shops began returning to Main Street. You can't talk about culture without talking about food. You can't talk about a resilient local community that doesn't have a way to generate its own food and its own traditions that are based upon food. And so our project really looks at how can we rebuild what we've lost? How can we reinvigorate, create more resilient communities? But the challenges are many. You know, the Second World War found us fighting on 2 continents at the same time. We mastered the concept of economies of scale. And we took that same principle and we applied it to almost every industry after the Second World War. And our food system entirely consolidated. It became cheaper to buy a loaf of bread that came from 7 states away than from your local baker. And so as a result, all that infrastructure disappeared. And so at forums like this that are about resilience in local communities, it ends up being actually a very, on some level, pretty boring conversation because it's really about how do you rebuild self-reliance? How do you rebuild infrastructure? And I'll give you just a few examples really quickly. I was in North Carolina and a man showed me a map. 95 mills in the state of North Carolina in the 1920s. Guess how many were there in 2015? One. Because somebody had just reopened it and they'd show me this map. They said there used to be 3 in this town. Well, what happened? Well, it just became cheaper to put things in railroad cars and send them away. Now we're seeing this resurgence of people wanting to have a more local, accountable food system with a face, a food system that they can be a part of. And people are even desirous to grow wheat. But the problem is we haven't made combines small enough for small scale wheat production in 30 years. This is a combine that had come from Germany, the Hegel. And communities like this one in Northern California pool their resources to buy a Hegel so they can all grow wheat on their land and they can just have this Hegel go from farm to farm to farm. It's this idea of having the appropriate technology, which is one of the biggest challenges in rebuilding local food systems. Slaughterhouses. This is in Lopez Island in Washington State. I went to see Temple Grandin, who many could say is one of the chief architects of how we've consolidated animal confinement systems and slaughterhouses in this country. And I said, Temple, The trend now is really people are realizing that we might have gone too far in that direction. How can we make things local again? And she said, well, there's one mobile slaughterhouse in America. It's on Lopez Island in Washington State. It's the only model I can think of that might be a future for us. So I went to Lopez Island. The land trust there had a big problem on their hands because they had always traditionally had cattle on that island, but they literally had to put cattle onto the car ferries and take it across to the mainland to actually get these animals treated. But now they've converted this semi, and they now have a truck that goes from farm to farm to farm, completely saved the industry and created a new economy around this local food. But it's not just mobile slaughterhouses. Down in Georgia, it's hard to read, everybody was talking about this term relocalizing. Everything across the Athens area, Athens and Atlanta, Decatur, that entire area, for 200 miles all around it, people are rebuilding their local infrastructure, taking slaughterhouses that have been out of commission for 30 and 40 years and getting together and rebuilding them. That's all of the boring stuff that happens when you actually rebuild a food system. All that infrastructure that's been lost having to be refound. The single most image, of which we've made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, that is trafficked the most is this image right here. And yet it's a term that people don't even really understand. But this is a regional food hub. If you're going to encourage all of these small growers to grow things, you can also encourage them to be expert salespeople at the same time. How are they going to be distributors and salespeople of their work? Regional food hubs appear to help all of those local producers. They say, you grow these things, and I will find somebody to buy it for you. When you get regional food hubs, you begin to really strengthen a community and connect consumers with local food producers. And when they get bigger, you get farmers coming together and saying, why are we driving 10 trucks to the same supermarket depot 200 miles away? Why don't we consolidate and get one truck and get one refrigeration unit with that, which we can share together? This is in Eugene, Oregon, and this group has become one of the real leaders across the United States, or they're called organically grown, and showing farmers how to join up together, pool resources, cooperatively distribute, and build really vibrant food economies where they live. In San Francisco, they had an idea to take immigrant women and actually give them a kitchen where they could actually build food businesses. Everything from a kitchen that they could use to even business classes, even somebody to design their logo, even accountants had to explain to them, even people that would get them into farmers markets and get them into retail stores. They've now launched over 100 businesses in this one kitchen incubator, as it's called La Cocina in San Francisco. And we're now seeing kitchen incubators. They're just about to open in New York as well. We're seeing kitchen incubators all over the United States. This is what it looks like when we try to imagine rebuilding all the infrastructure that we dismantled. Farmers, young farmers, have a tremendous problem getting on the land. When we had our crash of 2008, all that money that left residential real estate went into speculative farmland real estate. I don't need to explain that to anybody here. But I had heard about two people that had taken their money out of Wall Street and said, hang on a second. We're investors. Why don't we just invest where we live? Since we have a value system that's all about resilient, strong local economies, a vibrant local food system, why can't our investments intersect with that? So what they did was they took their money out of Wall Street and they said, who are the best farmers that we know that are young farmers? How can we help them get on the land? How can we co-sign on loans with them so they actually can buy farmlands? But not only farmland, buy the implements to become farmers. As you see that shiny tractor in the background. So at 6:30 in the morning, I meet these two young farmers, Casey and her husband. And we're going to meet these investors. And as the investors pull up in their truck, they go, here come the farm fairies. And turns out it's a term in Oregon that they use for these people that are actually investing in rebuilding the local food system. But that's really what it looks like. It's just people taking their money and connecting it to their values where they live. Our work also goes across Europe and also in South America, as Amy mentioned. This is a group of producers in Oaxaca, Can't show all the images here for the purposes of time, but it was actually started by women who created a cooperative to bring back amaranth production in Oaxaca, which used to be the traditional staple grain, but it disappeared 400 years ago. It was actually outlawed by the Spanish because there were so many religious acts tied to amaranth that competed with the Catholic Church that they literally made it punishable by having your hands chopped off if you actually grew amaranth. So it's very, very powerful political story for them to have that return there. And now it's becoming a very vibrant part of the economy, all driven by women. The image wouldn't fit on this screen here of these women with their cooperative. But they get the men to grow it, and then the women run the businesses, and they do all the value-added products that come from that amaranth. So our work extends into Mexico and obviously in Spanish. Again, always looking at how do we take all of these ideas that are all solutions and find the people that can explain it in their own words. Our project's not just images. We really believe in portability of ideas. We really believe that you've got to take ideas to where people are. If a magazine editor was to say to me, your picture's like this, we want to chop it up and put it like that, I would give it to them in an hour, chopped up and like that. Because for us, it's not about the art, it's about the message that is delivered by that art. And so because of that, we totally subscribe to the principle of being utterly portable. We have a series with PBS where we animate all of these images, we shoot videos, and we had last year the highest of the most highest watched and highest rated short film on their service last year about the difference between a cage-free, pasture-raised, and free-range egg. We also did a short film for PBS about true cost accounting, the principle of true cost accounting, which they kept on scratching it off every list I gave them of the films we were going to do because they said it was too wonky. It's the number 2 short film that they've had with us. People want to understand why they live in a food system where food is so cheap. They want to know why it's rigged in favor of an industrial model, and people are onto the game, and this film that we did, True Cost Accounting, really explains that, I think, quite well. We also take all the images we make, which there's hundreds and hundreds, and we print them. And you could go to our website today. You could go to Lexicon of Sustainability.com, and you could literally say, I want to have your show. I have 5 places in my town where I'm going to do a show. And a week later, a box will show up. And it's a show in a box, and you get to keep it. So upper right is a classroom in South Central Los Angeles, an elementary school. Bottom right is a climate conference in Central Park, where they took the images. They thought that they shouldn't leave them inside the exhibit. They actually put them on the streets and in Central Park, and people began leaving notes and writing comments about them. Lower left is a Slow Money conference. And the upper right is my favorite, for reasons which will become clear in a second, is a street fair in Amarillo, Texas, where the child holding that picture had seen the show, had asked his teacher if they could have it in their class, and then all the kids made artworks inspired by the images that they had seen, but about what was happening where they lived. Then lastly, we publish books, and we have websites. You can go to lexiconoffood.com. You can go to, we're recently launching lexiconofwater.com. You can go there, so we have all of those things. But the thing that had the biggest impact on us was realizing that there was a whole opportunity to go where we couldn't go ourselves and to teach people how to do this form of storytelling. We had curators in Iowa who were Ames High School. You would think, how is it possible that students in Ames, Iowa would want to have a show about sustainability? These kids asked to be curators. They did 20 shows around Iowa. And then they wanted to get on the Skype with me and talk with me. So I said, sure, I'll talk to these kids. They get on and say, there's one problem with your show. I said, what's that? They said, there's nobody from Iowa in these pictures, so it doesn't really mean anything. We've done 20 shows. That's what we're back to report to you. I said, well, I'm not going to be coming out to Iowa. And they said, no, we're going to make the images ourselves. Just teach us how. So I laughed, and I said it wasn't really going to happen. And then, because I don't run the lexicon, my wife does. 2 weeks later, I was in Iowa with 2 school buses and 80 kids. Took them all over the state. And they made these images that were so incredible, I don't have time to show it, but you can see it in our book and on our website, that we actually rented the metro station underneath the USDA in Washington, D.C. And all the T-Mobile ads came down, all the kids' artwork went up, which resulted in the USDA bringing the kids to Washington, D.C., buying the show, which resulted in Congress people on Capitol Hill doing a show as well, meeting with senators and Congress people during the framing of the Farm Bill. Amazing experience. And we realized this idea of explaining what a locally based food system is, helping people figure out what their local food system is, who are the principal actors in it, and what are their sustainable practices, and then how to make an image to actually explain that, and then turn it into a show where they're putting a face on farming where they live, might be a good idea to try to do as an academic program, which we now do in hundreds of schools across the US, and also and we have a Mexican program with Mexican team that's in Spanish. We're in the third and the fourth year of that here in the US, and I want to show you what happened this year in Iowa, entirely driven by high school students. Iowa had an interesting story last year. The city of Des Moines, 500,000 people, has the worst nitrate pollution of any public drinking water in the United States because of all of the industrial agriculture. They have the largest nitrate removal facility in the world. They brought in a new guy to run it, and he said, well, hang on a second, why am I paying all this money to clean all this? Why don't we get the people who are actually putting the nitrates into the water to pay for it? But you really can't do that. There's something called point source pollution and non-point source pollution. You really can't prove it. It's very hard to prove. I won't get into the details of it, but he found a way, an amazing way, that's now in federal court next summer, and it very well might actually change the way many industrial farming practices work, and first in Iowa and probably across the US. So these kids came to me and said, we'd like to look at water where we live. How can you help us to tell the story of water in Iowa because nobody understands it? So, working with the school, we took applications from 80 or 100 students, we whittled it down to 50, working with 3 teachers, an English teacher, a biology teacher, and a civics teacher. We actually had them figure out what the biggest challenges were in explaining water quality in Iowa caused by industrial farming. We started with them going out actually and becoming certified as water monitors and actually learning how to actually take samples themselves to know about their own water where they lived. And then it meant getting on buses and actually going around the state, seeing things for themselves, seeing the last remaining wetlands that exist in Iowa. Because, you know, Iowa's amazing. 92% of the entire state has been geographically reimagined in order to grow corn and soybeans. Wetlands removed, etc. So they want to see what that looked like. They want to see the impact of soybeans and the impact of corn, and they wanted to know why that had created such a dramatic problem for people's drinking water in the state. And of course, they talked to experts. You know, when we first started this project, the provost, which I can say, at Iowa State University, sent out a letter with my picture on it and my bio, and a link to some things that I had said, saying to faculty, speak to this man at your peril. Which was super awesome because I didn't know who to talk to at Iowa State, and suddenly I got 100 emails, right? They were really amazing, generous soil scientists, both with Iowa State, with USDA. And what these kids do, as part of our program, they learn not just to be passive receivers of knowledge, but they're journalists. They're asking questions, and they're taking pictures. And they're using this style that we teach them how to do. And in the course of that journey, they're really meeting, this is Bill Stowe, the head of Des Moines Waterworks, who will soon be more widely known in the United States because he's really the first person who's figured out how to hold industrial agriculture in this country accountable for its practices. Then the kids went back to the classroom and actually looked at how we did our work, used our curriculum, and then they actually went onto computers, built these images, and then actually put them all together. These are 16 and 17-year-olds. So how did they end up at the state capitol a month ago when they were holding the hearings on changing water laws and saying, how do these kids end up there? Well, they ended up there by constantly recycling and returning to and revising that work, taking their first show to Iowa State, of course, and having those same soil scientists actually review and critique their work, practicing their public speaking skills, and then going back and changing that work, revising it, to end up with a show that is now traveling all over Iowa in advance of this federal case. And when that trial begins, and some attorney is going to stand up in front of a jury and say this is too complicated for you to understand, there's going to be a show across the street with 50 kids who beg to differ. And this is their shows as they're traveling. They're now giving speaking engagements across Iowa. And they're now working with legislators in their state. My favorite image is this image right here of the legislator taking a picture of the image so that she could put it on her Facebook page. So this young woman said it to me best. She said, you helped us find the tools to show and create the world that we want to see. And that really has shaped our work. As we've moved into the next evolution of the lexicon, we've really begun to focus on working with other organizations. Now we work with many, many organizations to help them message their stories of creating solutions in the communities where they live. Arkansas, in the Ozarks, turned out it was legal to put a hog CAFO in there with 8,000 pigs by simply putting a small little announcement in a paper that's not even delivered in the Ozarks and put it on an EPA website. But these people all got together. They called us up, had us come over to Arkansas so that we could actually explain. It's too bad you can't see this. It created a series of images to explain exactly what is being compromised in terms of water quality. The hubris of Cargill and putting this hog CAFO here was amazing, because when we created our first national park that was a river, it was the Buffalo River in Arkansas, they put this CAFO only 4 miles away. So the CAFO literally is leaching into the Buffalo River.
What's it called?
A CAFO is a concentrated animal feed operation. It's what makes your McDonald's hamburger 99 cents. What makes your 99-cent taco at Taco Bell possible. But the problem with a CAFO, which I'll just quickly explain here, one pig makes as much waste as 6 or 8 people. So if you have a town that's, let's say, 30,000 people, which would be equal to the equivalent of a hog CAFO of this size. If you had a town of 30,000 people, how much do you think you'd spend a year on just the waste? Just dealing with waste. I can tell you, because I've spent too much time at municipal waste departments. You're probably going to spend about $2 to $2.5 to $2.75 million a year just dealing with the waste generated by a town of 30 or 40,000 people. You're going to have 4 to 6 full-time employees. A hog CAFO, the same comparative size, doesn't have to spend any money to clean its waste. It just gets put onto the land, or it ends up in waterways. And what they actually call it is, they call it a comprehensive nutrient management plan, which I love. I love that. We made a film, and whenever people would say that in the film, we would cross out nutrient and put poop. When I told my daughter this story of the 6 to 8 pigs, she said, "Welcome to Poopy Town," which became the name of the film we made about this, which you'll be able to see later this summer at lexiconofwater.com. Our work now is all tied to activists. What we realize is that activists, our work is all tied to organizations. What we realize is that all of these organizations come to us with the same thing. They want to have the tools to message their stories. They have great stories. They have a very hard time messaging. They have to overcome the climate fatigue and the fatigue of all of these crisis pornography stories that they hear. They don't hear enough solutions. And so we help people try to find those solutions. And sometimes it even takes us out of the United States. Malls, which I wasn't going to talk about today, but I'd like to close with talking about malls, is a town the same size of Ketchum, 5,000 people. It's in the Italian Alps, the area of Italy that speaks German, for reasons that are too long to get into today. But you might have heard of this town because the Iceman that they found, Ötzi, in the 90s, came from the mountain right above the town. What's amazing about this Iceman is that they did DNA samples of what was in his stomach, his last meal. And they found that the same grains and the same food were being eaten in that valley, that very remote valley, 5,000 years later. A resilient community, for sure. But climate change had its impacts here as well. And as that ice receded, it opened up more land to agriculture and made it warmer, made the growing season longer. And in a period of only 20 years, it has become the single largest producer of apples in all of Europe. This very small, very tight valley structure. And as you all know, when you buy an apple, you can't buy an apple with a blemish. So you've got to spray the hell out of it with pesticides. And those pesticides create challenges for people's health because pesticides don't actually respect boundaries, right? There's actually a principle called pesticide drift. This idea that if you spray on one farm, it'll go into the other farm, which is what happened. Farmers all across the valley that had been organic, that had been raising livestock for literally 1,000 years, suddenly found out that all of their land was tainted by these pesticides. Now you'd say, well, that's just the cost of living in a modern industrial society. That isn't the way that they looked at it. And so they contacted us, asked us how we could help to tell that story. What was amazing was they got pediatricians together with pharmacists, with hairdressers, with veterinarians, housewives, people who had never come together to ever organize ever in their lives. And they met in secret for 2 years to try to figure out what they were going to do about it. And finally, they came up with a manifesto to explain all of the harm that's caused by pesticides in their town. Everybody told them they're crazy. You're not going to stop pesticides. It's impossible. But they did. They were able to create a public referendum by using something that they have in Europe, which is called the precautionary principle. We don't have that here. Precautionary principle is, I don't have to actually prove scientifically that that chemical you're spraying in your field that's blowing into my child's school is hurting my child. Actually, the onus is on you. This precautionary principle is what's behind, for example, an attempt to label GMOs in Vermont. Never really tested in the food space in such an aggressive way, but it was tested in a town of 5,000 people. They got a public referendum. Nobody took it seriously. No industrial companies just sent it on the town. But 2 weeks before the election, when a poll came out that said that 80% of the people were going to vote in favor of a ban, everybody descended on this town. It's too late. Of course, as Bob mentioned earlier, it's all about how you message. They didn't say they were against pesticides. If anybody can speak German. They said they were for a pesticide-free town. And using this legal precedence, that's the town's mayor of 5,000 people, they actually won. So what is he pointing at? He's pointing at the stack of lawsuits that have been filed against him, personally and against the town, by Italy, by the European Union, all because of this fact that this one town stood up for the integrity of their community and the health of and safety of their people. We're now doing a series of images. We're doing a series of films that explain what precautionary principle is, what pesticide drift is, what collective impact is for these people. The films will be in German and also in Italian and English. And then a show that will travel around to the rest of these areas. What is the end of the story? Well, as of today, The town has now in effect a series of organic laws. Everything has to be organically produced within the confines of the town. All the food in public schools is all organic. And it just shows what happens when people get together, having no really organizational skill or knowledge of any kind, but just a desire to stand up for their rights in their community. Thank you.